Hi, Michael Taylor here, CEO of Geo-Expert Search. Today's guest is going to be none other than Chris Woods. We are going to delve into relationships and how they matter in the ground engineering industry. And we're going to give some hints and tips on the practical stuff which can help decide if the project goes well or perhaps not so much. We talk about the pace of modern work, why picking up the phone still matters, and the biggest misunderstandings between consultants and contractors. Also, while you're here, if you're looking for a new role in ground engineering or you're looking to bolster your team, feel free to book a one-to-one consultation with myself in the link in the description. But for now, let's get into the show. Welcome to another episode of the Ground Investigation Podcast. Chris, welcome.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to chat.
Great. So you spent 25 years in the geotechnical industry, starting in consulting and then moving into ground improvement and contracting. So looking back, how did those early years in consulting shape the way you approach projects and people today?
So I think, you start out in industry and you don't know which ends up. And you're trying to develop work ethic. You're trying to figure out who you need to talk to, when you need to talk to them. So as a field engineer, you're dealing with drillers, you're dealing with people in the office, new folks that you haven't met. And one of the things that always struck me is that you don't know how or when you're going to talk to people, throughout your career. And so just if you want people to help you, you got to help them and kind of vice versa. So just being humble, learning the ropes, putting in the hours and trying to build those relationships was kind of like the first thing you're figuring out because, right, you get put out in the field and your project manager sends you out there, oh, go do this. Well, you maybe don't want to tell your project manager, like, what are you talking about? So you got to go find people and you got to talk and learn and interact with people. So that's how the relationship building starts at that early age of the career.
So as we've worked on major and complex projects around the US and internationally, so at a high level, what do you think has changed most in the industry since you started and what stayed pretty much the same?
I think it's the pace. I think everything is expected to be done yesterday, right? A lot of things happened during the pandemic. A lot of not good things, but some things that came out of the pandemic were, the strong use of these kind of platforms. Everyone's on Teams, everyone's on Zoom. There's no more getting on a plane or driving to an office or doing something to go meet with people, right? So everything's got to be done yesterday. And so I think that, just there's like this constant sense of, oh God, I didn't get this done today, or oh man, I didn't get that done, right? Like I think there's like that pace is definitely palpably different to me from 25 years ago. And then I think that, I'm sure you've had guests on talking about difference in generations and things like that, but I think that also that, okay, that immediate gratification and moving fast and doing all this stuff where, I don't think people are as willing to view putting in your time and learning the ropes, so to speak. A lot of us, that were doing this 25, 30 years ago, you would spend years in the field learning foundations and watching construction. And now it's like, some folks do that for a couple months. It's like, all right, I know all this. Let me, I've been doing this 25 years and there's a hell of a lot I don't know still, So I just think that the pace, things have just, everything's going to happen yesterday is a big difference. And, things are the same, things that might be the same to me would be you're still expected to be technically competent. You're still expected to come up with good ideas to solve, whether you're the consultant trying to solve problems for the owner, whether you're the contractor trying to come up with okay, someone's put an idea on paper. Well, as a contractor who does that type of work every day for a living, maybe you've got a slightly better idea to try and help save time, save money, right? So those aspects are still the same. It's just the problem is it all has to happen at nano-speed now.
So as a kind of extension to that question, what would you say potentially hasn't changed that you wish had, or maybe something for the future that you hope does?
I think the part that maybe I wish, with that whole speed and not necessarily being in the same room as people, and you don't necessarily see the depth of relationships that maybe you would have had quite a bit of time ago. I mean, hell, I remember being a field engineer like before I even had a BlackBerry. right? Like I didn't even have a cell phone, right? I was on a pager, right? You'd have to physically go places to talk to people and interact with people. And, now it's like you send somebody a text and if they don't respond within 3 minutes, it's like, what's going on here? Why aren't they responding to me? You know what I mean? Like, it's just everything. It's just, there's no breathing room,
Yeah, no, you are right. You kind of get to send receipts as well, especially like on WhatsApp, things like that. You send like, well, it's sent, it's landed, they're ready. They haven't come back to me though.
Yeah.
After a few,
Yeah, the only one you
come
can't
on.
pull that one with is your wife, right? Like, you can't pull that
Yeah,
Reddit and not respond for a couple hours because that'll get you in some.
yeah, no, it certainly will. Okay, so you've seen the industry from both sides. What do you think is the biggest misunderstanding between consultants and contractors that still exists today?
I don't know what the right way to phrase it is, whether it's risk management, whether it's allocation of risk, whether it's understanding of risk. But having spent a lot of time on like now both sides of the fence, right? The consultant wants to tell the owner, well, look, this is how this project should be built. And then for the most part, shed as much of that liability to the like, well, this is what it needs to be. So these guys can build it. And if they don't build it right, I don't know what you want me to tell you. Right.
Yeah.
Whereas contractors, some contractors may have the tendency to say, well, okay, we're going to do it exactly the way you said it. And if it doesn't work, it's on you. Right. So there's not that necessarily middle ground where it's not so much trying to come together as a team to solve it. It happens a lot, but like in the instances where it's not happening, it can get ugly, right? Instead of just everyone rolling up their sleeves and saying, all right, this thing's kind of sideways on us a little bit right now. Like, what can we do to fix it? And some of that starts with the tone that the owner will set, right? Like if the owner's like, all right, guys, let's get everyone at the table, let's figure it out. Like that's one way to set the tone versus the whole right out the gate, everyone's pointing fingers. Well, you said this and your report said that. And you know what I mean? So I think understanding how the risk is assumed, how it's shared, whose responsibility it is, and how you work through, right? Because the below the ground part of construction is the hardest part. That's where the most uncertainty is. Steel, concrete, like I'm not going to sit here and say that structural engineers got it easy, but they kind of got it easier than us in the sense that like, how wood's going to respond, how concrete's going to respond,
Yeah.
steel, all this stuff. We're making all these assumptions based on a borehole about that big, over however many acres, right? So I think there needs to be the assumption that some things are going to go wrong, and then it's hopefully you got the right team in place to help sort of fix it when it does.
So what would you say a kind of good relationship looks like with a consultant and contractor, on a live project versus a potentially, bad one or one that's going south?
I think it's the willingness to listen, right? So like I can think, obviously not naming name, just some examples to come to mind. The jobs that have lost money, that have been the most problematic from like, as I've been on the contracting side, are the ones where the engineer knows the absolute most in the room. Just ask him, right? He's the engineer. This is what he said. That's how it's going to be done. Even though maybe there is a better way to possibly look at it, he doesn't care, right? So the instances where things go well are the instances where you have people that have mutual respect. I mean, I worked for 15 years for Langen Engineering all over the U.S. I now work as a contractor with a whole bunch of guys, and there's a mutual respect that's been built up over the years that they have expertise at what they're doing, but they also recognize that contractors have expertise at what they're doing, and they're going to have some areas where they're not necessarily going to budge on what they want, but we have some ideas on like, look, we can do this maybe a little bit better, a little faster, a little cheaper, whatever it may be. And it's that willingness to sit down and listen to each other and respect the opinions that are at the table to come up with a good solution. That's the ideal scenario.
So have you seen any examples where strong communication or trust between parties genuinely improve outcomes, or where poor relationship caused problems that didn't really need to happen? Any examples in relation to?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, trust, the willingness to listen to one another. I think of jobs I've done where it's really been a struggle. And on the contracting side, it may be jobs where the engineer, he knows the most in the room. Just ask him, right? This is what he said. This is what's going to be done. And there's like a complete discounting of the experience that the contractor may have to bring to the table to solve maybe it's not even a problem. Maybe it's just trying to optimize something to save the client money, whatever it may be. That, like, not being willing to listen, not being willing to trust each other, or on the jobs that I've seen in my career that have not gone well, that's been a central theme um, to those projects. Whereas, you know, I work a long time for a consulting firm, and I work with a lot of those folks now, and there's a mutual trust in what, I know what they know what I know, and um, how can we sit down and come up with a decision? Again, maybe it's not even a problem. Maybe it's just a way to make a job go faster, save some money, whatever it may be. That trust and that willingness to listen to each other is pretty much the key to that interaction.
So you said relationships are something that you carry with you throughout your career. How early should engineers start thinking about that fact? Is it straight from college, or what would you say?
Well, so my daughter's a sophomore in high school. My son just graduated college this past year, and they will tell you that, I've been harping on them since they were in like grade school about it is all about relationships. So learning how to form relationships, they're working on that in high school with their teachers, with their peers, with their, the teachers, they'd be their superior, right? You're all going to work, everyone's going to work for someone at some point. Well, if you're in high school, you work for your teacher, right? And so, that's learning how to communicate, learning how to advocate for yourself, learning how to ask questions, seek knowledge, find the answers you need. It's no different being in, you know, pre-calculus trying to like talk to your teacher to figure out how to do homework than it is talking to your project manager about, hey, I'm working on this design. You've done this a bunch. What am I missing here? Or what are your thoughts on this? That kind of thing. Right. So it's, those skills are something you need earlier in life. And I don't think they're focused on maybe as much as they should be. But yeah, my daughter would tell you that, at least once a week, she probably gets hit with the, like, it's all about relationships.
Yeah, that's our job, isn't it? To preach to our children. Yeah, about maybe not doing some of the things that we maybe did, or whatever it may be. But I suppose the younger generation, communication for them in particular is quite different, isn't it? The communication, yeah, previously would be the face to face, would be the phone call. Now, it's often, I don't want to make that phone call. I'd rather send an email, or you can send a text to WhatsApp or whatever it may be.
Well, yeah, and now it's like, but yeah, texts that aren't even English. It's all like abbreviations. I'm like, she'll text me something like, what the hell does this even mean? You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah. But some things you need face to face, especially when it comes to negotiate things. When if you're trying to win a client, and then you try and, especially I'm thinking about myself here, when it comes down to, percentages and rebate periods and things like this. And then you have people trying to kind of negotiate on email. And you're like, we can't negotiate properly on email. We have to have a conversation.
You can answer questions on email, right? You can go back and forth on quick things, but sitting down and trying to get a multi-million-dollar deal across the finish line, that you're not doing that on tech.
Yeah. Especially in consulting. I mean, I've seen the emails with just, maybe it's about a report, and then it's, there's kind of 50 questions around the report, and, copying everyone in, that sort of thing, which is quite different. But in terms, I suppose, to actually win someone over and negotiate influence, not quite as good, unless you're great with your writing skills, I suppose. But yeah, it's definitely a tad different, and will continue to change, I suppose, over time. Okay, so when you look back, how often have people you've worked with early in your career reappear later in very different roles?
It feels like almost weekly, you know. As a staff engineer, you're working for project managers, you're working for principals of your firm, things like that. And um, those are your subordinate, right? You're looking up to these people, they're mentors, they're people helping guide your career. Now 25 years in as a, someone that's managed to get myself to an executive level myself. Now, when I'm at things like Deep Foundations Institute or Geo Congress or some of these, industry organizations that we're involved in, guys that I used to be out in the field on a drill rig for, developing boring logs. I'm now sitting across the table from them on technical committees, putting, provide input on industry problems. that we're trying to solve. And it's a peer-to-peer relationship now as opposed to a, supervisor employee type. So that's been a pretty gratifying thing to be able to see some of those relationships that I've had for a long time kind of get to where they are now.
So for engineers who are technically strong, and this kind of goes back to a little bit to what we discussed earlier, but struggle with the people side of the profession, what advice would you give them?
I think I people don't like them, but the reality is that stereotypes exist for a reason, whether it's cultural, whether it's just professional, whatever it is. And, a lot of times engineers get a bad rap that, they're the dudes with the pen in their pocket and a calculator and don't really want to talk to people, right? Like that's a thing about engineers. So
Yeah.
the folks in the industry that have worked hard to develop those soft skills, those communication skills, they maybe evolve into that seller doer model, going and getting the work, being an executive lead, being a leader of men, so to speak, kind of thing, or leader of people, not men, but you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Those same people, if you're out selling work, you're managing groups of people, you're interacting with clients, promising, okay, we're going to get X, Y, and Z done to you for a design. We're going to make this happen. That doesn't happen alone. You know what I mean? And so maybe some people don't want to be the face of the franchise, so to speak, right? But there is a place for the technical people that make things happen, because if you're going to sell a service, you need to have those technical people, so you got to find what you're comfortable with. And when you excel at something, you're going to move forward and you're going to do well. I think, one of my closest relationships at this point in my career is with, we ran our previous firm together for a number of years, Rob Schaefer, and that guy knows more about cranes, operation of cranes, safety of cranes. What do we need to do, to do dynamic compaction and make it happen? I'm the one that's got to go out and sell it, but I can sell it all day. But if the cranes aren't there to make the work happen and they're not running and that knowledge is not there, it doesn't matter what I'm selling. And so in that instance, he's not, his desire is not maybe to be the one having to be up talking in front of rooms of people all the time and doing that kind of thing. But it's no less valuable than what I do, right? Everyone's got to have their role to make these things work and make companies work and grow and move forward.
Definitely. One can't survive without the other. To be technically gifted, if we don't develop those soft skills. And I think that's important what you said in terms of, being a stereotype, and it probably usually is right, and is a stereotype or a reason, or can be. But to go out your way to develop those soft skills are really, I suppose, what is required from most people. If you're not naturally comfortable around people and having conversations, then you do have to take it upon yourself. I would imagine most probably won't, because they'll just stay in their little box. And it's because it's really stepping outside the comfort zone, isn't it? I know this because it's outside of my comfort zone to a point. And it's definitely not, my most suited environment. But because of that, that's where you would grow the most. Get yourself out of your comfort zone, terrify yourself a little bit, and then you can always, leave and kind of rethink yourself a bit later on. But yeah, definitely, I know what you mean.
No, I mean, I think like, I think back to like, I don't know what grade I was in. It was like, I don't know, like fourth grade or fifth grade or something. And some of it, you're learning to play band, right? So you're learning to play instruments. So I was in the process of learning how to play trumpet very badly. You know what I mean? And I was supposed to be with a group of other people to, like, I don't know, do the national anthem, something. And I melted down. I was like, I can't go on stage. And anxiety. This is when I was like fourth grade or something like that, right? And now it's like, if I got to walk out into a room and be on a stage in front of 1,000 people, like, I don't really think twice about it, because it's, you build, you just do it over and over and over, and you learn to overcome and get better at things.
Don't think about it. As soon as you start to analyze whatever it may be, whether it's getting up and leaving the house early in the morning when it's cold to go to the gym, as soon as you start to think about it, it can go bad. You're just not tally through of it, because you can think all these reasons why you shouldn't. But really, there's only one good reason to kind of continue, isn't there? From a contractor's perspective, what do geotechnical engineers most often misunderstand about ground improvement?
I think just the limitations, right? I think most geotechs are pretty good at understanding, like, okay, if we've got this soil type, like if we have a soft clay, you think wick drains, you think rigid inclusions. If you've got an uncontrolled fill, maybe you're thinking dynamic, right? Like I think that level of understanding's there. But like, I've seen some geotech reports that'll try and go a step further than just say, all right, there's an uncontrolled fill. We recommend doing a dynamic compaction program. And then they'll start putting in their specs about, well, and we say this weight from this drop height. And it's stuff that's not technically feasible, right? Like the crane size doesn't exist or whatever it may be, right? So, or like a performance criteria that given that specific technique can't be achieved maybe based on the soil profile you might have, right? So I think it's just that like level of like what are the limitations to a given method of ground improvement. Um, that's probably where I spend as much of my time as any when I'm meeting with consultants, doing lunch and learns, doing seminars, things like that, trying to share that knowledge as to like what those limitations might be so that, we got better, understanding within the industry.
So how can consultants bring more specialty contractors into the process earlier, but without compromising independence or design responsibilities?
So I get, there's a lot of, whether it's general contractors, geotechs, whatever, but specific to the geotechs, I've managed to develop a lot of relationships over the years where just that, what we were just talking about, limitations, right? So rather than put out a geotech report, because like as a guy that like spent the first like half of my career to this point as a consultant, there's nothing I hate worse than like getting a project to like documents to bid a project and a geotech report that's got a whole bunch of information in it that like is not like technically feasible, right? And then you kind of have to go back and say, well, we can't price this job because of X, Y, or Z. And then it doesn't reflect that well on the geotech because the owner will go back and say, well, what are you guys talking about here? Why'd you put this out? Right. So there are a lot that will reach out to, whether it's me, there's a lot of us, the contractors in the industry that will gladly put eyes on a set of like preliminary boring logs. Just, hey, we just got done in the field. We think this is the answer. Can you just take a look at these? And, that doesn't compromise anything. Like there's no guarantee that means like, okay, cool, I'm going to get this job. Doesn't mean that I'm going to probably, if I do them a favor, like looking at something to just put eyes and gut check it, will I get a fair shot at bidding the job? Yeah, probably. Right. So there's definitely some like business development, it's not completely altruistic, but again, that's how you build these relationships and you build trust, right? Like I'm known for saying like, I'm not in the business of selling something I can't do, and so I'll very much say like, no, this is I get what you're saying, but it's not going to work because of whatever reason. Maybe you should be considering this and help kind of craft, steer them on the direction they need to be before a geotech report gets put out there that's got some issues with it.
Perfect. So looking back across consultant contracting, leadership, and mentoring, what do you think young ground engineering professionals should prioritize beyond the technical competence and maybe beyond communication as well, as we've touched on already?
Well, I think we've touched on it throughout the half hour here, but it's the communication, and it's not. I've had some engineers over the last period of time, whatever, that worked for me. That it's like, did you call this guy and ask this question? Well, I sent him an email. Okay, but did you call? Well, I tried texting him. Like, pick up the damn phone and call someone, right? Like that's pick up the phone, go have a lunch with someone. Someone you've worked on. In my last 15 years, I've found myself in the role of, I live in Virginia. I'm an East Coast based guy, but I've worked with people all over the country. And I've done multiple jobs with people that I've talked to them, God knows how many dozens of times over the years, but I've never actually sat at the same table with them. So if I find myself in that city, I try and take the opportunity to sit down, call them, have lunch, whatever. Again, that communication is where it's a skill that I think is vastly underrated and is not really grasped that well, especially the younger generations where, again, it's this whole, let me send a text, and then if I don't get an answer back in, 2 minutes, like, well, maybe someone's on a conference call. Like maybe, you know what I mean? Like there could be a reason they're not responding to you, right? So that's,
Thank you.
I think the biggest thing I would suggest.
I think it's probably even more important as with these kind of you know, the embracement of AI through outreach and email and messages and everything. And then you never quite know if it's just being written by an AI, looked over by a human, or somewhere between the two. So yeah, those actual client meetings, especially lunch. Lunch always helps. Box of donuts, in an office, stop by on a coffee, that sort of thing. Help, because when things do go wrong occasionally, like economically, and work becomes a little bit more tight, then you remember the people that done that, as opposed to the ones who are just a bit more transactional, I suppose.
Absolutely.
So if there's one lesson about relationships in this industry that you wish you'd learned earlier in your career, what would it be?
I think, and I've learned some of these lessons the hard way, and some of them recently. But relationships they are a two-way street, right? So what you're gonna put into a relationships, what you're gonna get out of it from what you can control on your side. But you also need to be willing to recognize when a relationship isn't worth your time anymore. Um, you know,
Huh.
whether it's a boss that maybe you've lost trust or respect for, maybe it's a client that has tried to take advantage of a situation. You know, there's nothing that says you have to work for those type of people anymore, right? So learning when to kind of maybe pivot, focus on the relationships that are much more um, gratifying, that you're able to have trust and a two-way sort of interaction with people rather than, I mean, yeah, I think you use the word transactional. I mean, that's a perfect thing. Some people,
Huh.
think people exist, just to get them what they need and move on. And so those are not healthy relationships that you want to build on. Right. So I think, um, as I sit here 25 years in, I've had a couple of those that stick out pretty notably that, maybe it would have been time to do something different or go in a different direction or something a little differently, maybe sooner.
Maybe a bit sooner. Yeah, I mean, it's a good advice for the industry. It's good advice for life in general. I think that, isn't it?
Yeah.
Okay, that pretty much takes us to the end of the podcast, apart from a new feature, which is called a question from a previous guest. So this is from Katie Potter. She is a geotechnical engineer. So the question from Katie is, what is the most rewarding project that you have worked on in your career and why?
The most rewarding project. I think it's a tie for first. If I can cop out and give an answer to one question with two. Um, Early in my career, being in New Jersey, working with Langen, two projects that stood out. One was the Prudential Center, which is where the New Jersey Devils play. Which, ironically enough, I can't stand the Devils. I'm a New York Rangers fan, right? But I got to do the foundation design, and that was like the first like mega project that I had worked on. And when you talk any aspect of a project that could have gone wrong or happened, like that was one of them. From finding 2,000 bodies under the footprint of the arena from like a old potter's field from like the 1600s, having to do archaeological digs, you know, that complex of a project that became like such a centerpiece, um, in New Jersey was exceptionally, gratifying. And then a couple years later, I had the opportunity, MetLife Stadium, where the New York Giants play. Unfortunately, the Jets end up playing there as well, but that's sort of a side thing that we have to deal with as Giants fans. But my family, had New York Giants tickets going back to like the 1950s. And so to be able to have my name on the geotechnical report for the foundations for that stadium, I've got a picture still to this day, standing next to the first pile that was driven for the stadium. That was a pretty profound project for me as well. So those are probably like the two. When I look back, and this is when all said and done in my career, those will probably be the top two that I remember.
Right. Well, that pretty much brings us to the end. Chris, thank you very much for coming on the podcast.
No, I know you and I were trying to nail down an opportunity to do this for a while, and with some of my career moves and stuff I was making, my schedule was not necessarily the best. So I very much enjoyed the conversation. I appreciate you having me on.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that episode. Feel free to connect with myself or Chris. What we'll do is we'll leave a link in the show notes. And again, while I have your attention, if you're looking for a role in the ground engineering industry, or you're looking to add people to your team, then feel free to book a direct consultation with myself. And the link for that will be in the description. Thanks very much, and we'll see you next time.